All right, just hopped off with Dr. David Rabin. He is awesome. He's one of the founders of Apollo Neuro, which is a really cool neurotech device that uses touch therapy. We broke down the mechanisms, the psychology, the neuroscience of what's going on within their technology. And he taught me some really cool things about touch therapy and vibration and how that affects our nervous system, the vagus nerve, and can bring us, calm us down. Not only has he done research on this, he is a researcher himself. He's an MD, PhD, which is a wild, wild time. You don't see that very often. Had a really intense conversation with him, but it was a good time. And then it was just me this time. So in the lab results section, I got to let y'all know whether or not I would get the Apollo and the upcoming Apollo 2.0. And what I decided for this one was... Welcome back to the Decision Lab, everybody. Today we're talking to Dr. Dave. He's a neuroscientist, a board-certified psychiatrist, and the co-founder and chief medical officer of Apollo Neuroscience. Welcome to the Decision Lab, Dr. Dave.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Heck yeah. Clearly you're up to some big things. Lots of stuff, lots of cool things we're about to talk about. Excited to get to know you a little bit. Let's move into our origin story section and just tell us a little bit about your background and how you got here.
Sure. So I was from a very young age. Maybe like 4 or 5 years old, I started to have very vivid dreams as a kid, and so vivid that I actually did not know the difference between them and my regular waking life. And they weren't bad dreams. They were just like dreams where I'd be doing something with my brother or a friend. Then, and this was between maybe 4 and 8 years old. I was having these dreams pretty frequently. And I would be then in my regular waking life talking to them and mention something that happened that we did together. And they'd be like, "What the hell are you talking about?" And I would instantly realize that did not happen when I was awake. It happened when I was asleep. And it felt so real, though, that I was referencing it in my waking life. And as I started to get older, I never really understood these phenomena. But as I started to get older, I, started to go to school and have more scary dreams and, nightmares. And so I asked my parents, what are these dreams that we're having and what do they mean? And, are they real? And they're like, oh, they really just wanted me to not be afraid of sleep. And like many parents, and I think it's just smart. And they just said, dreams aren't real. Don't worry about it. They're nothing to be concerned about here. And, that sat with me for a little while, but I think over time I continue to have vivid dreams, and they didn't happen as often moving forward, but they still happened. And they were, again, so real that it was really hard for me in the moment to distinguish the difference between what I was experiencing in them and my waking life. And so I think it just cued the question in my head of maybe the adults don't know what the word real means. You know what I mean? It's if these feel maybe real is a feeling more than it is a description of waking life. And maybe there's different versions of real. And this is just my early childhood brain, just kind of thinking about these things and trying to understand the world in my own way. And so, if projecting that forward, I started to become interested in science fiction and neuroscience and psychology. And, as I got into, especially high school and college, I started to study more neuroscience and psychology, philosophy. And I ended up, wanting to study dreams, but dreams at that time, going back to early 2000s, were very nebulous and challenging to study. And there weren't a lot of successful scientists that had studied dreams and made careers for themselves. And so my mentors at that time, and my dad being one of them, was like, son, if you want to have a career that's successful and not have to worry about money all the time, you should probably do something like become a doctor, because if you're a doctor, then you can see patients and make a good living. And then you can also do research on the side, because back in the day when he trained in medicine, research was a core component of clinical medicine, and not so much today. But I ended up taking that path and he was right, and it was very wise advice. And I went and studied clinical medicine and found myself still interested in mental health. And but also, medicine as a whole was very fascinating, and how the body deals with stress actually kind of came to the surface as something that was a core fascination for me, because stress impacts the way that we make meaning from the world. And I started to see these patterns in stress with my patients and in the community with people who achieve great feats in life, like the Michael Jordans of the world, and, famous artists and musicians and people who have had these tremendously stressful lives that channel that stress into these incredible growth opportunities that help them reach a peak level of performance in their domain that was, beyond, above and beyond what many other people thought was possible. And then we saw patients in the clinic who were our mental health patients who were experiencing the same or very similar levels of stress or kinds of stressors, and they were unable to get out of bed in the morning, right? And I've started to ask the question of why would the same kinds of stress impact one group so differently than the other? And why is some people turn stress into growth and other people turn stress into disease? What are the factors there? And so I spent a few years studying, or actually it was like 6 or 7 years, studying stress on the neuroscience level of how cells deal with stress and in the eye and the brain of human cells and aging disease. And then I realized through that work that I just couldn't spend my life in the lab. It was too depressing to be at a lab bench all the time and not interact with humans. And I really, really realized through my lab work how much I enjoyed interacting with humans, and that I really wanted to study stress on the whole human level. And so it was about 2012 when I was treating more mental health patients in medical training, and I was seeing a lot of veterans and traumatized women and traumatized children and folks who were really sick with mental illness and not responding well to medication. And I started to notice that this was not just my patients, that this had been written about in the scientific space, that people with chronic PTSD, especially from childhood or war zones, repeated traumatic events, do very poorly with medication-based treatments. And so I started to look outside the box. Starting around that time, I discovered psychedelic-assisted therapy through the research that was going on. A couple of my friends who were interested in that area started just sending me papers, and I started reading about it and became fascinated by psychedelic medicines because these were drug-based tools. They're plants and pharmaceutical-based tools like MDMA that induced a dreamlike state when you're awake. And I was like, oh my God, this is incredible, right? So full circle, I'm able to now study dreams in people that we can induce dreams in with medication or with plants. And then you look at the results of some of those studies, and people were with severe mental illness, depression, PTSD, were getting leaps and bounds better in terms of their treatment responses than they were with our standard of care medications. And so this, instantly was like, when I started reading these papers, I was like, okay, psychiatry, mental health is a field for me, and I need to study psychedelics and how they work. And so I started that process in 2012, just doing my own research in the literature and what had been published from the 1940s and 50s all the way through to the present day. And then when I started doing more direct psychiatry work in the 2014 through and beyond, I ended up having the opportunity to get trained in psychedelic-assisted therapy. And I was studying the fear and safety responses in the body at that time, and how trauma is like a learned fear disorder, and how our best treatments for trauma are safety, relearning safety. And so looking at the balance between fear and safety, what that does to our nervous system. And that led me to kind of pull on the threads there even more and once I got trained in MDMA-assisted therapy in 2016, and that whole training was around relearning safety. And that was like the core foundation of that training and that treatment. I realized that there had to be other ways to tap into that safety response system without MDMA. And that MDMA was really just a tool that we were using sorry, I have allergies, but MDMA was a tool that we were using to increase access to safety states in the brain, but that it wasn't the only way to get there. And so then I started experimenting with technology. I was like an amateur musician growing up, and so music was very impactful in my life as well. And I started to experiment with music, electrical stimulation, vibration, and how that impacted a sense of safety in the body. And then a few years later, that led to us figuring out how to use very, very low frequency bass sound waves to induce safety states in the body in near real time, which my wife and I ended up commercializing out of my invention at the University of Pittsburgh, and we called it Apollo, and now I'm wearing it on my chest, and here we are.
Rest is history. I like that. So a little bit more about you. Would all of these types of things, like in middle school, if I knew you, do you think I would have known you'd be here?
No. I mean, I was always like, I think even back then, I was always like thinking a little bit more outside the box from other kids. I always had this like level of curiosity and wanting to know how and why we do things and how things work more than the other kids. But I think a lot of that was like chalked up to my dad being an engineer and engineering thinking, and engineers love to figure out how things work, and he just fixed everything around the house, and everybody knew my dad to be that guy. And so I don't think anybody thought that I would have left, not that I left medicine, I still practice clinical medicine, but that I would have be spending most of my time inventing technology and doing that kind of thing, but as an entrepreneur. But yeah, I mean, I think people in general weren't that surprised to see that I took an atypical path that was very like research and innovation focused rather than just practicing medicine the same way every day that we were taught. So yeah, I mean, middle school, probably not, but high school, high school, college, I think people, might have had a better guess.
Started to get there. Yeah, I get that. Another thing that I find interesting, especially with people who've worked in the trauma space, the mental health space, is what problems and struggles have you struggled with and overcome? And maybe that's imposter syndrome, negative self-talk, making friends, parenting, anything like that that's been a challenging pattern that you've overcome?
Yeah, it's a great question. I talk about this a little bit. I think the biggest challenge for me was really starting school as a very young kid. For me, that's when I started to have nightmares, and where my dreams really took like a negative turn and a scary turn. Going back to my story on dreams, and I think I went from having like a very, like many children, having a very like nice, somewhat idyllic childhood where I was like I felt very loved and cared for and by my parents, and didn't have anybody like bully me or pick on me, and then landed in school and like the bullying started day one. Right. And I did not like school. I really, really did not like school, mainly for that reason. I felt like very different from the other kids, even though had much more in common with the other kids than I knew at the time. I felt very like excluded from the group and not part of the community as much as I really wanted to be, and kind of like ostracized for that. And that was hard. And I think, there's a part of us at that age, looking back, it's much easier in retrospect to understand this than it was at the time. At the time, I was like, what's wrong with me that I'm not accepted? Right. And I think that looking back, I can see that was my thought pattern. And the biggest mistake that I made at that time was that I cared about what other people thought about me. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And I think anybody who's had these kinds of experiences as a child or even as an adult has to reconcile with that at some point, where you have to know what you know about yourself and know that you're good enough just being you, and that you're worthy of love just being the nature of being born a human. You are worthy of love, deserving of love, and you are loved. And that was not clear to me as a child starting school. And school really like made a big dent in my self-confidence during that time, where that took me, God, it must have taken me like at least 20 years to overcome. And then I still find myself going back to those childhood ways of thinking at different times of my current life, despite the fact that I've done so much self-work and so much therapy and like all these things. Like cognitively, I know that I'm great and I'm worthy of love and all these things. And then there's still this childhood part of me that is wounded from back then, because I did at that time take what other kids thought about me and said about me personally and seriously, because I valued their opinions. And that was really unhelpful to me. And I wish I had, going back, known that and had more preparation for that, and known that this is going to happen. You should expect this. So don't take it seriously. But I didn't. And I think even if you do know that, it's hard. And so for me personally, like overcoming those challenges to my self-confidence and self-worth has been like a lifelong journey, that a lot of the work that I do with patients is around, and my clients and even the technology is around just helping reinforce these feelings of self-worth and self-love that we often are, through whatever societal influences, taught to forget.
Without a doubt. I'm trained in IFS psychotherapy, so the parts language I really appreciate. The question I have, as someone who is a psychiatrist and neuroscientist, you spent all this time, how have you embodied and truly learned to believe that I'm enough and I am worthy?
I mean, it's literally just doing that. It's like practicing. So it's first believing that belief is real. Does that make sense?
To me, because my favorite quote is, whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can't achieve. But please help me understand, when you say belief is real, what do you mean?
I guess what I mean is that if you believe something enough, and direct your human energy into it, which I would call intention. So like, what is the output of my human energy? And I put that into a belief, like I am worthy of love. I am great as I am. I don't need validation from anybody else to, make me worthwhile, for instance. Then as you start to practice believing in yourself, you start to get really good at believing in yourself. And then it becomes second nature, and you don't have to think about it anymore. You just believe in yourself. And I think like that was a lengthy process. It took me probably through I would say like the end of graduate school, medical school, so like mid-20s, to get to a point where I no longer had to remind myself to believe in myself. I just did it. And as soon as I did it, and when I remember the moment probably when I first started doing it regularly was I was probably about 25 when I stopped having to think about actually like consciously believing in myself, consciously practicing that thought pattern. And I remember just how good I felt in that moment and how other people's responses to me, like my interactions with other people, changed dramatically. Like me going into an interaction knowing that I'm good just as I am, I'm more than good enough. I'm like, in fact, I'm at least as good as everybody else, if not in some ways better, because of all the hard work that I've done, right? But not to think about myself as better, just to get to the point of good enough.
Yeah,
and
that's
walking
okay.
into interactions like that, all of a sudden, my interactions I started like things that I wanted to happen just started happening. It wasn't like I didn't have to force it. I didn't have to like push on things to make them happen. It was like people were there and ready to collaborate, and they saw me for who I saw myself to be, not for the way I was taught to see myself. And
And
that was fascinating. It was just like thinking about yourself like a lab experiment, right? Like we're the greatest lab experiment we'll ever have to work on. And we have the opportunity to change and slightly modify or greatly modify our thought patterns or our actions every day, every moment of every day. And every time you do that, you see the response. And that response is how you feel, it's how you think, it's how people treat you. And when you get the response you're looking for, it's like, you're making progress. And so I just continued down that path. But it started with this idea that like, belief, if everybody else in the world is believing in stuff and it seems to come true for them in lots of cases, then maybe I should try that too, right? And maybe I should like step out of my atheist, disillusionment of the world that it's just me alone, right? And maybe if I believe in something more than me, that's inclusive of me, that things will start to go better. And so I just tried it and it worked.
it's crazy what happens when you go from a human doing to a human being.
Exactly.
Not many people get to that place though. So that's inspiring. And I appreciate you sharing that journey with us.
Of course.
You are one of the probably best people on earth to ask this question. So I would love to understand before we dive into Apollo Neuro and stuff, but can you explain what happens in the brain during a psychedelic experience and how it differs from just doing traditional talk therapy alone?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think the way that I'll answer that is that first off, psychedelic experiences are not requiring of a drug. Psychedelic is just a word, and psyche means mind, and delos means to show or to reveal. And so psychedelic is a word that was coined by Aldous Huxley and Humphrey Osmond, I think in like the late 1940s or early 90s, as a way to describe the state of being that you enter when you take a psychedelic drug, in their case LSD. And what they described is revealing parts of your mind to your awareness, to your consciousness. And that's really interesting when you think about that word, because that word is not specific to drugs. Because guess what? Dreams are also doing that, right? So when you're having a dream, your egoic protective brain is feeling safe enough to quiet. And you could think about this from an IFS perspective too. Like your protectors are subdued. They feel safe enough to let the guard down. And all of a sudden, when your guard is let down, you can witness and come in contact with all of your vulnerable parts and the parts of you that don't necessarily feel safe to come up during the day. They're still part of you. And oftentimes they're more important parts of you than your protector parts, but they're just been taught, like in young men who are sensitive, right? Sensitive young men get discouraged and picked on for being sensitive. That was one of the things people picked on me for. So what do you do as a young man? You say, well, I'm not going to be sensitive anymore. And you shut that shit down. And then the next thing you know, you're not sensing things in your environment that you should be, or in your body that you should be, and you've lost touch with your intuition. So psychedelic is a cool term because we're starting to come out of the era where everybody stigmatizes it by association with an illegal substance, and now starts to understand it as just an altered state of consciousness that involves feeling safe enough to access your inner parts more deeply. And so that is how psychedelic drugs work. is that in the context of regular old psychotherapy, our protectors are still active. And when you do proper psychedelic psychotherapy, which I'm one of the few psychiatrists who's also ketamine and MDMA trained. And when you do that kind of work with people, you work with them to feel safe enough in advance of taking the medicine to be vulnerable with you. And then when they take the medicine is a catalyst to that safety. So it's activating the parts of the brain that are your like strong self-identity parts and your safe emotional safety parts. And those inhibit your amygdala, which is your fear center, that tells you, hey, I need to protect myself right now. And then when your amygdala is inhibited because you're feeling so good and so safe, then all of a sudden, guess what? You have rapidly accelerated access to all those deep inner parts that want to come up, that have been asking to come up, to be worked on, to be accepted as part of the whole. But normally we're so stuck in protector ego mindset that we are unable to come in contact with those parts without judging them. And so that's what psychedelic therapy allows people to access. And it rapidly accelerates psychotherapy because it shuts down that fear center when they're used properly for a short amount of time. But if you use those medicines in the recreational space, that's not necessarily the same experience you're going to have, because psychedelic medicines are non-specific amplifiers of awareness. So in the therapy setting, they amplify safety because that's what we're going in with. But if you're at a party and you're exposed to people who make you feel unsafe and you're under the influence of a psychedelic drug, then you can amplify fear instead. And that's the bad trip.
Yeah,
that's the bad trip.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Wow. That is awesome. That I love that. So what's your perspective on like self-energy, what IFS calls self-energy, that like healing mechanism in the IFS framework, at least, is self-energy, and the psychedelics are giving more access to that internal self-energy? Is that represented in the nervous system somewhere? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that every discipline of medicine, like Eastern and tribal medicine and Western medicine, going back to Hippocrates from like 4000 BC or whatever, they all have their own ways of describing this concept of self-energy. In modern medicine, I would say the most similar thing to self-energy is what we call like the vagus nerve system. So that's the parasympathetic rest and digest recovery nervous system, which gets activated by feeling safe and soothed. And so you can send direct stimulation to the vagus nerve and feel safe and soothed. But if you get a hug from a loved one, if you go to the beach and feel ocean waves washing over you gently, if you hold your favorite pet, hear your favorite song play, take a few deep breaths, you'll activate that same vagus nerve system in your body through feeling soothed and safe. And then that automatically allows you to divert, it tells your body that you're safe enough to allocate resources to recovery and healing. And then the body knows how to heal itself, because that's what our bodies do. And that's what Hippocrates said, right? Like Hippocrates said that the source of healing comes from the person seeking to be healed, not from the healer. Mm-hmm. And in our society, in modern medicine, we have totally forgotten.
Oh God, I know, dude. It drives me crazy. It drives me crazy. I love that. And it's interesting too. Dr. Paul Zak actually told me that the vagus nerve has the most oxytocin receptors in the entire body. So all of the hugs and all of the social connection you're describing, it makes complete sense why that would activate that rest and digest. Is that what safety is in your nervous system then? Vagal tone? Or would you describe it as something different?
I mean, there's a lot going on, right?
Yes.
Because the vagus nerve is only the part that extends out of your brain and brainstem into the rest of your body to then deliver the signals to allocate resources to recovery and healing. And it can take feedback, it can take signals from the environment, like soothing sensations like the smell of your mom's chicken soup or your favorite song or your pet, snuggling your pet, and it can take that and then send that signal back up to the brainstem and the brain. But the vagus nerve is a cranial nerve. And so what that means is that it comes like out of the top of the brainstem and goes down, and then goes from the body up to the brainstem, but it doesn't go into the brain. So once you get in, so yes, I would say that's what you suggest is true from the brainstem down. But once you get into the brain, it gets more complicated, because the brain has so many different parts and structures that govern fear and safety and acceptance and self-identity and decision-making and, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a lot more complex stuff that's happening in the cortical parts above the brainstem than below. But the vagus nerve is the critical piece, I would say, from the brainstem down. And once you get above the brainstem, I would say it's probably the latest data in neuroscience is probably showing it's the insular cortex, which is a really interesting part of the brain in the limbic system, which is the part of the core of the brain that curls like underneath. And that's where all of our emotions and emotional memories are stored. And so when you feel touch from somebody you like versus somebody you don't like, it has a completely different experience, right? The reason why is because even though the kind of touch might be the same, it could be identical hug, but if it's from somebody you don't like, it's repulsive. And it's from somebody you like, it feels tremendous, right? And one of them, the repulsive one from the person you don't like, feels completely unsafe, and the one from the person you like feels so safe. And the reason why is not because of the vagus nerve input, it's because that input gets interpreted in your emotional cortex and then associated with the context of this is a person I feel safe around, or this is a person I don't feel safe around. And when that information gets combined in the insula, it then tells your amygdala, the fear center, turn up or turn down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's interesting. The wild part too is it's all predicted. Predicted processing is one of my favorite things to think about. Question I have also, is it true also that most of the nerve innervation, most signals from the vagus nerve are going up to the brain? They're afferent, they're going into the brain. Is that true?
Versus out?
Versus out? Is it sending more to the brain?
It's a bidirectional system.
Right.
So you have afferent vagus nerve information coming in. So that's like when you experience anything soothing or safe, taking deep breaths, getting a hug, that's the afferent signal coming in. And then the efferent output is then what the brain then tells the rest of the body through what's called the hypothalamo-pituitary axis that says, like, I'm feeling safe. I interpret this hug as safety. So turn down heart rate, turn down blood pressure, turn down respiratory rate. You're safe enough to recover. And then it regulates blood flow in the action piece. So if you think about like, you know, the opposite of the vagus nerve, parasympathetic nervous system is the sympathetic fight or flight system. And what these two systems are doing constantly, they innervate the entire body. And what they really seem to be doing is regulating blood flow. Because what organ systems get blood flow dictates what organ systems are functioning as a priority, right? So when you're asleep, and then all of a sudden you wake up suddenly because it seems like there's a predator outside your door or a robber, right? All your blood flow, your sympathetic nervous system cues fear, and then all of your blood flow leaves your reproductive system, it leaves your digestive system, it leaves your immune system, and it gets diverted by vasodilation. The sympathetic system is vasodilating, increasing blood flow to your heart, your lungs, your motor cortex of your brain, and your skeletal muscles, to get you out of that situation to safety as quickly as possible. Safe again, and your body has settled down, and your body's like, okay, I can take a breath, I recognize that I'm safe, all is well. Then the vagus nerve gets activated and it sends the opposite signal that says, hey, tighten the blood vessels to the heart, lungs, and motor cortex and skeletal muscles, and let's dilate blood vessels back to reproduction, digestion, immunity, metabolism, sleep, and rest, right? And that's why it's so hard to sleep when you're stressed out, is because sleep is our most vulnerable state of being. And you don't want to fall asleep when a predator is around the corner, nor do you want to be empathetic or reproduce or think about reproducing when there's a predator around the corner, right? You will die if there's an actual predator there.
Yeah.
So our bodies evolved over hundreds of millions of years, like from ancient mammals. This is not unique to humans. This is like hundreds of millions of years old, hardwired in our bodies to prevent us from ending our line and succumbing to a demise by diverting blood flow one way or the other so that our bodies can react to threat when it comes, but then respond and heal and recover when threat is gone.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. And just for clarification, dilation means opening up blood vessels. Yep. Constrictions means closing. Vasoconstriction, vasodilation, just if anyone was curious what those mean. You're probably the perfect person as a neuroscientist and psychiatrist to ask this question, but does the body keep the score? I have a controversial opinion on this. My background is cognitive behavioral neuroscience as well, but I'm curious, like, you are a neuroscientist and psychiatrist. So does the body keep the score?
That's funny that you asked that, because I've noticed that in our field, it took a really long time for it to be accepted that the body kept the score. And now a bunch of people are like, the body doesn't keep the score, but it does. It definitely does. The question is how, right?
Yes, it is.
And so to give you an idea of how the body keeps the score, we just published Dr. Rachel Yehuda, who is one of the most famous researchers in trauma, when she was at Yale and Sinai, published some really interesting papers for the very first time showing that there are epigenetic changes to cortisol receptor genes in the offspring of people who have experienced severe trauma. So for instance, to break that down, epigenetics means on the DNA. So in all of our cells in our entire body, except sperm and egg cells, have 100% of our DNA in it. So the core base code in every single cell, except sperm and egg, is identical. And yet, look at our bodies. There's like 100 million different kinds of cells, right? We have all these different kinds of organs. Our skin knows to be skin and our brain knows to be brain. How does it know? Because of epigenetics, which is the code that sits on top of the DNA that says, hey, I'm a skin cell, increase skin proteins and turn down brain. And then you have your brain cells that have epigenetic code that's different that says, hey, I'm a brain cell, turn up brain proteins, turn down skin. And so what Rachel showed that was never known before was that your epigenetic code on cortisol receptor genes, as one example, cortisol being one of the most important stress response hormones, is changed in people who have severe PTSD and their offspring. They pass it on. And that yeah, it's wild. And so this was the origin of the Western understanding of the transgenerational, across-generational inheritance of trauma. And so this finding was really crucial, and nobody believed it, like many very famous critical scientific discoveries over the history of science. Nobody believed it when it first came out because it was right in the face of the understanding at the time. Nobody had any understanding the body kept a score at that time. This is back in like the 80s and 90s originally. And then all these studies were replicated in animals over the last 30 years, showing that if you traumatize an animal in the lab, and then you breed that animal, it takes in safety, it continues to have the traumatized behavior in its offspring with those epigenetic changes for 4 generations or more. At least 4 generations. And when people have those epigenetic trauma markings on their cortisol receptor genes, they have an increased likelihood of mental illness. Even though they did not experience trauma themselves, their parents or their grandparents experienced it, they still have an increased likelihood of mental illness, right? Meaning that when they are exposed to severe, intense stress, their likelihood of developing mental illness as a result goes way up, unlike people who don't have those markings. And so we published so that is, I would say, the single most important argument to understand that the body keeps the score, because it's literally stored in our epigenetic memory across generations. And so we published a study. I had a theory that MDMA-assisted therapy, because trauma is a learned fear disorder, we use safety to treat it. MDMA-assisted therapy appears to work by accelerating safety learning. And so I thought in a very short time frame, just 12 weeks, 80% response rate, 60 something percent of those people are no longer meeting diagnostic criteria for PTSD at 1 year out after just 12 weeks of treatment and no continued treatment, which is unheard of in mental health, unheard of. And I was like, well, if MDMA therapy is having this amount of effect, then we should be able to see it on the epigenetic code. And so we partnered with MAPS, with Rachel and a few other leading scientists. Candace Lewis led the study with me, and some colleagues at Yale and USC, and Modern Spirit, Board of Medicine. We had a really great study group, and we were able to show for the very first time that, and this published in, I think it was February 22 in Frontiers in Psychiatry, that just 12 weeks of MDMA-assisted therapy, if you measure somebody's cortisol epigenetics before and after, that their epigenetic code starts to go back to the way it was before they were traumatized. Yeah. And the amount of change of the epigenetic code, the score, we'll call it where the score is kept, right? The amount of change in that code is directly proportionate to their clinical outcomes, meaning how much less symptoms they have. So the people who respond really, really well to MDMA therapy have even more epigenetic improvement than people who do not.
Oh,
and
fuck.
We had never known that before. We'd never known that trauma was reversible at all, let alone the fact that it can be done with psychedelics in an accelerated way. But I would say, like, if people are wondering if the body keeps the score, it in fact does. And it's in the epigenetic code where that score is kept, which is really exciting because it's not the genetic code. And the genetic code can't be changed. So if it's in the genetics, we're fucked. But if it's in the right? If you were born with it and it's in your epigenetic code, you're literally fucked. Like, there's nothing you can do. We can't edit your DNA safely. But what we can do is we can change your epigenetic code through environmental experience, because the epigenetic layer is where we store the interface of the environment and ourselves, is in that epigenetic layer. And that's what the MDMA study we published proved. So yes, body keeps the score, and you can change it, which is pretty wild.
Does that lead to things? Because when people talk about the body, I'm thinking like SE practitioners that are the biggest people that do stuff like that, or somatic experiencing. SE means somatic experiencing. I know you know that, but just for everyone else, they will say things like your IBS, your lower back pain, your these aches and pains in your body. Like they explain that they're saying trauma is stored in the body in that way. Do these epigenetic shifts in your DNA lead to those types of things? That's the part where I'm just kind of like, I don't know about this.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know enough yet to draw the relation to make that connection, but in science studies, that is, we don't have the scientific studies to prove which epigenetic changes, for instance, are related to trauma-induced back pain, right? Like we don't have all of that information yet. At some point, we probably will, because we now have a base framework to study it. And the technology. But I think the anecdotal evidence of that is very strong in that people who have repressed, unprocessed traumatic experiences. So say you had, as a child, some really intense childhood trauma that was never dealt with, never processed, never talked about it. You just stored it deep down inside your body the whole time until now. We see a lot of those people having physical manifestations of those traumatic events. And it could be like increased shoulders and forward head position, and which then contributes to back pain, right? We see higher heart rates, higher resting heart rates, higher blood pressure, right? We see other things, and we see higher rates of autoimmune disorders often in people who have severe trauma. There are some studies coming out looking at people who have long COVID, and there's anecdotal evidence now showing, not in peer-reviewed trials, but a lot of people are seeing that those who have severe childhood trauma are more likely to develop long COVID, right? So there is something going on in the body that is trauma related that results in changes to the body that can likely be resolved with trauma therapy at the core, but we just don't know all of the direct connections yet to say like this is related to that or that's related to this. Like we don't know all of it, but there's enough clues there that it's hard to deny that the body the body is storing this information when it's not processed properly. Like there's something being stored there. We just don't fully understand scientifically how to explain it yet.
Yeah. The field of psychoneuroimmunology or psychoneuroendocrinology, I really feel like is exploding out of these questions that we're contemplating right now. And I love it. It's my favorite. Let's take all the most complex systems known to humanity and study them all at once. So
yeah, because they're all interrelated. Right. Yeah. And then when you look at, I think that's a major development in medicine and science, is not just looking at each organ system separately, but looking at how they're interrelated with other systems when they start to dysfunction, because it gives you a much clearer picture of the whole person and what's going on. Like people don't usually have a problem. Occasionally they do, but usually they don't have a problem with just one part of their bodies. There's usually other stuff happening. And so if we look at it just as in a vacuum, one organ or one part of your body that's having a problem, and that's not the case, then we're missing a lot of the bigger picture.
Yeah, 100%. It's so interesting. We've talked about IFS, how IFS is very much, the more and more I work with people's parts, I work a lot after abusive relationships. So I see people who are trauma bonded and they have a part that wants to go back and a part that is like, no, I couldn't want this. And then a part that is like trying to figure out which to do. And it's like this triangle, right? Like, and it's like not just one isolated thing, it's a system of things. And so it's really cool to see medicine getting to there, psychology getting there, like everything getting there. So, all right, beautiful, beautiful transition over into kind of the claim for your fame, or sorry, your claim to fame, which is Apollo Neuro. So I would love, as we shift into the claim to fame section, if you could tell us what Apollo Neuro is and why we should care in 60 seconds.
So Apollo is music for your body. If you have an iPhone, you can download it right now, Apollo Neuro. It works, and you try a demo on your iPhone in the App Store. But basically, it's music for your body that we discovered in my research at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, originally to treat trauma. And it works by sending very gentle, soothing vibrations that are bass sound wave vibrations to your body that feel like soothing touch. And when you feel those vibrations, it activates your vagus nerve and the safety response system in your body and calms you down and helps improve clear thinking and decreases your heart rate and improves access to meditative states.
Love it. I love it.
And I'm wearing it right now.
And so am I.
Oh, nice.
So,
you got the clip too. Awesome.
Yeah, I know. I love the clip. I wear too many other things to wear the wristband. My ankles are too big for it otherwise. So yeah, no, I love Apollo. There are other solutions out there though. So my question to you is, why did you decide to create Apollo instead of using other solutions on the market that do these types of things, like touch points or different things like that?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. And so I think part of the main reason I never wanted to start a startup, by the way. This was like not something that I ever envisioned myself doing, mainly because it's a huge pain in the ass. And I would have been making twice as much money as I make now running a startup just by practicing what I was trained to do in regular clinical psychiatry. So, there's a lot of sacrifices to doing it, but we did it because there was nothing else out there that could give you the benefits of feeling calm and safe and present in your own body without effort and while you're doing something else. So like you and I are both wearing this product right now while we're having a discussion interview, and you might wear this with other interviews or other situations in your life in the background. And I don't know a single other product that I can wear that activates my vagus nerve in a way that calms me down that I can use while I'm doing something else. All the other products that are out there, they take time out of your day. They work, a lot of them work, but they take time out of your day. They require effort, and time and effort, I mean, that's like, not to say we shouldn't put effort in, like breath work works for free, right? But think about how many people that practice intentional deep breathing. You can get the same benefits you get by using an Apollo or touch points or many of these other products just by breathing at 5 to 7 breaths per minute, but people don't do it because it takes time and effort. And so my patients were really struggling with this. I was, working in the clinic. A lot of my patients were, again, like veterans with severe PTSD, traumatized women, and people who just were working jobs, having kids, trying to reintegrate back into regular life, and struggling to have enough time to just like go for a walk during the day or eat healthy. And I'm like, well, if you don't have time to do that and you don't have time to breathe properly and take 5 minutes a day to do that, then maybe there's a way we can leverage what we know about neuroscience to give you something that does it for you. And that was the challenge we took on. And when we started to study the nervous system and how we respond to stress, and, biofeedback really came to the surface, because biofeedback is this, from the 1960s, it's this very old technology that I would say is the first Western proof that breathwork is real and has a real physiologic effect on the vagus nerve, which many of us now forget, but biofeedback is the real deal. It's an amazing science, and it's very simple. You just connect yourself to a heart rate monitor and a respiratory breath monitor, and you sit in front of a screen and you watch your heart rate and breathing patterns, and you just try to sync them. And within 90 seconds, 95% of people sync their heart rate, the healthy people sync their heart rate and their breath pattern, and your vagal tone goes up in 90 seconds, right? But it requires work and a biofeedback apparatus. So I started to dive into the literature, and I figured out that there were a few papers published showing that there were other things that you could do at that 5 to 7 breaths per minute rhythm that did not require you actively breathing, that induced vagal tone as well. And so I thought, well, maybe it's the rhythm that matters. It's not the biofeedback apparatus or the meditation, it's the rhythm, that 5 to 7 breaths per minute rhythm. And so what if we just sent the right rhythm to the body? Would the body know how to breathe properly and appreciate that rhythm? And it did. And that was the discovery, was that we could do this automatically for you using neuroscience. And I was like, okay, through touch. And I was like, oh, wow, that's crazy. You can just wear this thing in the background and it will make you breathe properly and you don't have to even think about it. And then we started testing it on ourselves and testing it on patients, and almost everyone responded to it, and it increased heart rate variability and vagal tone within 120 seconds in the lab in a double-blind randomized placebo-controlled crossover trial, which is the most rigorous form of clinical trial you can do. And when we saw that, we were like, okay, this is real, and if we don't commercialize it, it's just going to live on a shelf in a university forever. So let's do it. And here we are.
I love that. We'll get a little bit more into some of the data and the research in the lab section here coming up next. But before we do, who would you say is your ideal customer for Apollo Neuro, and what's the dream outcome you have for them if your product works perfectly?
I think the ideal customer there are lots of different people, lots of different kinds of people who benefit from Apollo because it works during the day and night, and you can use it in the background. So, I would say like during the day, the people who respond to the best to Apollo are and have like life-changing experiences with it, not counting people who are sick with illnesses, just of people in the regular population, are kids and teens who are struggling to focus in school and struggling to feel like energized and regulated, emotionally regulated. Because currently in today's world, I think like 30 to 50% of those kids get prescribed medication to manage their emotions and their energy. And that's not necessary. Most of those kids just feel out of control all the time and are grasping for control. And so they act out as a way to feel in control. That's the reason for most childhood bad behavior. But that is not something that requires medication to fix. And medication, in fact, does not fix it. It just stifles the problem. It keeps the problem there, but it puts a damper on it. And then as adults, those problems come back. And so Apollo is really, really great for kids who are struggling with attention, focus, sleep, energy, and that kind of thing, because it helps actually prevent them from having to take medicine that could be harmful and as often is harmful to them when taken for the long term. The most ideal customer on the adult side is anyone struggling with sleep, because sleep is our most vulnerable state of being. And we forget that as adults. We forget that like when we fall asleep, we're completely disarmed, right? Like physically, mentally, emotionally, in deep and REM sleep. You can be paralyzed in deep and REM sleep on purpose. Your body is like, you don't have access to your body. And that's important because that's where you get all your physical, mental, and emotional recovery so that you feel rested the next day. If we got all light sleep and no REM and deep sleep, we'd feel like shit the next day, even if we got a lot of light sleep. We'd still feel not rested. And so
hate when that happens.
Right. And that's the biggest side effect of pharmaceutical sleep aids like Ambien and benzodiazepines and things like that, is they increase total sleep time, but it's only light sleep. They actually decrease REM and deep sleep. Alcohol does the same thing.
Okay.
That's why they're addictive, and that's why they don't actually solve the sleep problem. You still feel kind of shitty the next day. So we developed an AI called SmartVibes that's really, really cool, that is the first wellness AI and most advanced of its kind that can detect when you're about to wake. It doesn't just help you fall asleep faster. It can detect through tracking. Apollo tracks your sleep, and most people wear it on their ankle for sleep. And it can detect when you're about to wake up in the middle of the night and then turn Apollo on automatically to prevent the wake up. And that has never been done before. We've never had a solution in the history of medicine. And you could talk to any sleep scientist and ask them this, or sleep doctor. We've never had a solution in the history of medicine that fixes or prevents unwanted middle of the night wake ups. The only product, for adults especially, the only product that does that is called a snoo, and it's for children under 1 year old, infants. Beyond infants, there's no products for this. And so the rest of us are just left to figure it out on our own. But we figured out that you can use AI to track your sleep. And as soon as your sleep starts to get disturbed, we just turn your Apollo on, very, very gentle, light vibration. And it's just like, shh, it's okay. And it just rocks you back to bed. And it actually works. And it solved my wife's insomnia problems, which were, albeit, entrepreneurship related insomnia problems, but they were insomnia problems nonetheless. And it disturbed my sleep. And so, they say like entrepreneurs invent stuff for themselves. It's really true. And it worked. And when we were able to get that to work, I mean, it was changing, because now all of a sudden we're sleeping through the night even better than before. And we had even better than before we started a company. And we have, so much more energy the next day and so much more clarity and focus. And you drink less coffee and you drink less alcohol at night to wind down, and you just feel so much more like yourself. And so anybody who has sleep issues, like Apollo can give you 30 to 60 more minutes of sleep a night. And that is absolutely life-changing. It's like 30 minutes at the low end. 30 minutes of sleep a night is 3.5 hours per week. And that's a lot of sleep. And that's like 1.5 times the leading sleep aid, the leading pharmaceutical sleep aids, just by calming your body before and during sleep.
Yeah, this is a perfect time to dive into our lab section, because some of this stuff, some of these things, a core question I had, because I dove deep into the research here, and the things that you guys talk about and the research that you describe, when you say like it can do these things, like what does that mean? Effective, what does that mean? A lot of, at least from my look at like your lab section, some of the stuff is a lot of preliminary research. There's smaller sample sizes. Is it generalizable? Some of the stuff that you understand from research, like How do you, as a health and wellness company, determine when to claim something versus not with preliminary research?
So we have about 12 completed clinical trials to date. So that's not preliminary. We don't talk about all the completed studies on the website because you can't. Because the way the science industry works, the journal publication industry, is that if you talk about a clinical finding or a research finding before the journal does, then the journals won't publish it. And so that's the challenge of having they have to be the first. Scientific journals is they have to be, your data is embargoed. And so they have to be the first ones to get the chance to publish your data, unless it's a scientific conference or something like that, where you're presenting a poster or a talk. So on the website, we have, I think, I'm trying to remember how many studies we talk about on the website. I think it's like 8 completed studies, 2 of which have been published. And almost all of our research is university-led by independent researchers. So we don't actually, unlike most companies that do their own science, we have university researchers do the science for us, and they have no business interest, no financial interest in the company. Whether the study succeeds or fails, it doesn't matter to them. They just want to do good science and to help their patients. So that's number one, how we're able to ensure the scientific validity of the work we do. And
would you consider that if it's you doing the research at your at an institution, like you, Dr. Dave, doing the research at an institution, would you consider that independent, even though you're the founder?
I mean, it can be considered independent if I am removed from certain parts of the process, which I do remove myself from. Like I remove myself from the data analysis part of the process, and I remove myself from the interpretation of the results part of the process and the publication process, but I help with the study. And so there's it's nuanced. So there's university departments that are established to make sure that these rules are followed, and they're called conflict of interest departments, and they're a huge pain in our ass, but they're really important because they prevent biased results from getting published. And it doesn't always succeed, but because I came from an academic world where science was, true scientific results were number one, I already know these rules, and I don't really care about publishing stuff that's not real. So I just remove myself from the process early and let other doctors and scientists who don't have a vested financial interest do it. And then I declare that. So I tell in the publication, you have to say, like, Dr. Rabin was not involved in, et cetera, part of the process. So, but in general, every part of the process, that somebody with financial interest is involved in, of course it introduces some bias, right? And so that's why we have to take the lead and like remove ourselves early rather than being on it. And that's why I'm not an author on most of our papers, because I don't care about the fame of a publication. I care about getting the good science out there. And so that's why we partner with universities. I think there's only 2 studies that are on our website that I actually am an author on, and both of them should be published this year. One of them is our Oura Ring study, and that study was a collaboration. That's actually the biggest study that's most exciting, where all our sleep findings come from. And that was a 1,300 person study that we did with Oura Ring between 2020 and 2023, where we tracked, this is after the independent, double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trials were done. And we have a guest. This is Daisy.
Hey, Daisy. Leo's over here.
She's whimpering, so I'm just going to bring her in. We did when COVID happened, all the sleep labs shut down. And we had only studied Apollo for performance at that time, not for like daytime use, not for sleep. But we had a few thousand prototype devices in the wild, and people were sending us their data saying, hey, this is helping me sleep better than I've slept in years. And they're showing us their wearable data before and after. And so I was like, this is like hundreds of people sending us this data. And I'm like, okay, we have to do a sleep study. So I had 3 university sleep studies ready to kick off in 2020. COVID happens. Every sleep lab shuts down indefinitely. Just doors shut. Sorry, we don't know when we're going to reopen again. And I was like, well, shit, I have no idea what we're going to do to prove that this works for sleep, until I went to Oura Ring and saw that they had a research portal that we were using. And Oura Ring, still to this day, even back then, is the leading wearable sleep tracker for accuracy and precision, not for sleep staging. Sleep staging is notoriously inaccurate in wearables, but for just determining whether, it's 65% accurate for sleep staging. But sleep on, off, or disturbances, it's like 90 to 95% accurate, and that's all we cared about. So I went to Aura and in 2020 and I was like, hey guys, can we use your research portal to do a crowdfunded study? And they said, sure. So we sent an email out to our users. We had about 4,500 users at that time. And we sent an email out to them. And within 3 emails, we got 1,305 people sharing years of Oura data with us and Apollo data. And we tracked those people forward for 3 years. And that study is fascinating because it is literally just regular people like you and me, like consumers in the wild who bought Apollo and who bought Aura, just using them as they would with the instructions that came out of the box. And then they have at least 4 weeks of Aura data at baseline, looking at their sleep before they ever touched an Apollo. And then we have years of Apollo plus Aura data. And what's so interesting about this study is that there were no instructions given to anybody, right? So that's everybody's wild. Just in their homes, drinking alcohol, using drugs, staying up late, like they're doing all the human things. It's not a sleep lab, right? Yeah. Sleep lab is not exactly representative of your normal sleep.
100% agree. 100% agree. Drives me crazy.
Yeah, so sleep lab studies are valuable, but really for diagnosing and sleep apnea and that kind of thing and sleep disorders, they're not that great for regular sleep measurement and assessment because you're not in the comfort of your own bed with your normal life. And so this actually was a huge blessing in disguise that we were able to get all this data and do a real world ecological study of regular old people just using these products. And we found that if you sleep just within one night of using Apollo for 3 hours at night, your sleep is statistically significantly improved within one night of using Apollo. But statistical significance is not that useful. So we wanted to see, well, how much is your sleep improved? And is it clinically significant? Does it actually make a difference in your life? And so then we look a few days in, a couple weeks in, 21 days in. And what we saw was that if you are somebody who sleeps less than 6 hours a night and you use Apollo for 3 hours a night for a couple weeks, you on average, you increase your sleep by 44 minutes on average. And it preserves sleep architecture. So it takes you from a poor sleeper. If you sleep less than 6 hours a night, you're considered to be a poor sleeper at high risk of sleep issues, disease, high blood pressure, heart rate, cardiovascular disease, all those things, mental illness. It takes you out of that category in weeks and moves you into, with like an over 75% chance, moves you into the healthy sleep category just by sending some soothing vibrations to your body for a couple weeks for 3 hours a night. So that was without instructions. People were just doing it. That was really, really incredible. And that study is going to be published in the next couple months. It was just accepted for publication. So that's really exciting. And that was one of the studies that I was on because it came out of my brain into the world. And, when I said, hey, can somebody else do this? They were like, no, you have to be on the study because you birthed it. And, everybody needs to know this is your child, brainchild.
It's interesting because the difference between science, what a scientist would think about it versus what general public would think about it. And that's in this podcast, one of the cruxes of things we come to with health and wellness founders is like this exact thing. First of all, clinical trials and these research things are not cheap. Like you have access to more data than anyone on earth has ever had in the history of humanity. It's interesting. Something I'm curious about that is beautiful. It's over 3 years. It's longitudinal. How do you, as a health and wellness founder, determine which claims hit the website versus which don't based on data? Because some of the studies, just from my read of it, were 11 participants, 20 participants. They're over shorter time periods, that are connected to some of the claims, if you will. If I'm putting on my critical consumer hat here, they might not understand that. They see pilot study and don't understand what that means exactly, or observational study, and they don't really know what that means, but the claim is being made from it. So how do you have thoughts on that or rules on that or things like that?
Yeah, so I think so pilot study means it's like first of its kind study in a relatively small sample. So usually like under 30 people or so is like considered a pilot study. It just means like first try. Let's see what happens. Mm-hmm. It's not double blind. It's not randomized. It's not placebo controlled. We have 2 double blind randomized placebo controlled trials that we did before we did any of this other work though. So that's how we knew that Apollo worked. And that's where the HRV claims come from, were that Apollo boosts HRV in as little as 2 minutes significantly. That came from those trials. So that was kind of the foundation for us of knowing, hey, this technology works and it works different than anything else we've ever seen. So that was the first claim that we made. Then we did a lot of pilots, which is how you run a clinical trials program, is you do lots of pilots across different populations, and you figure out like where you're seeing bigger or smaller responses, who's your ideal population, who responds best, who doesn't respond. And a lot of those pilots we just put on the website because we want people to know. And so most of those claims we actually don't talk about on the website. Those claims are too early to like advertise. So that would be like Apollo reduces PTSD symptoms. We've seen it, but we've seen it many, many times over and over again in studies and out of studies. But the studies that have been totally complete and analyzed were so small that we don't talk about Apollo as like a treatment for trauma. And so that's to give you an idea. We just don't have enough certainty around that to be able to say that. When our VA study gets published, we should be able to say it, and that'll be sometime in 25. That was a study of like 70 people in a VA independent lab with independent researchers. That gives us enough information to then say, okay, this is actually addressing symptoms of trauma and PTSD in a veteran population. And so we can then say, hey, we can make that claim. The other claims on the website are in large part, I would say, a mix of work that was done in the way that I just described to you. So like that Oura Ring study or our cancer pain study or the meditation studies that we talk about, those studies were done and completed, but publication was delayed for whatever reason because the publication process in science is a huge pain in the ass. And so, but that work was presented at conferences. It was deemed good enough to present at a scientific conference. And so when it gets presented at that conference, then it has hit a level where we can say, okay, this work is deemed good enough. The analysis has been run many times over by independent parties, and it's good enough that we can say with confidence, if you were to take a random person on the street and put them into this experiment, they would respond the same way. And does that make sense? And so
yeah, no, I love it. That's one of the biggest things we try to figure out here is really some people put the wildest claims on their website, but don't have a rationale like you're describing. And what I really look for a lot of the times is this kind of, there's actually thought that goes behind this. It's not just some random thing. And I'm not saying that I assume that, but I'm here for the consumer. So I got to ask those questions and help them understand that because they just don't understand that. So I'm really happy that you explain that.
Dude, these are great questions. I mean, it's good that consumers are skeptical because there's so much bullshit out there. And so many non-science-based companies are presenting themselves as science-based companies. And the biggest red flag that I see in the industry is people say something to the effect of, this is based on 50 years of research, right? And then you go and try to find any papers studying their specific technology and they don't exist.
Yes, because that is the number one thing we see on here. 100% agree.
And it's because they haven't done the studies of their technology, but is the theory behind the technology proven? Yeah, of course it's proven, because almost all of this stuff has been proven. Vagal nerve activation and stimulation has been proven for 100 years, since like probably 1910. It's real. But for us to claim that work as our own is not really fair or accurate. And so we had to take what we did, or our version of a vagal nerve experience, augmenting experience, and then put that to the test and then show people, hey, we're a transparent group. Like, we were born out of the university science ecosystem. We would not be doing this if not for the university science ecosystem. And so we want you to know on the forefront, these are the 20 trials we have going on. If you want to participate, you can join us, participate, be a subject, learn about what we're doing, and inform yourself, because even the small trials are worth understanding. You know, like most consumer products only have trials of 10 to 20 people.
Right.
So I think that's like, it doesn't mean they don't work, but it means that there may not be scientific claims behind them.
Right. And a scientific claim is different than like one small study suggesting something. Like it's a big, the worst perpetrators of this, just from the freaking hundreds of these conversations I've had, is red light therapy. They claim all these photobiomodulation research, and they say big crazy words or whatever, and the exact claim, it's based on 50 years of research. And it's like, dude, the research that they did was 1,000 times the strength of the red light that you are describing, and it was super concentrated on a petri dish.
Right. And the same with PEMF therapy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, PEMF is this amazing treatment that was discovered to address non-union bone fractures in a very high intensity focused environment, just like with photobiomodulation. But that work is now being claimed, that like 40 years of research is being claimed by companies now that make consumer products to be FDA cleared and proven, but their products had never been tested. The products that went through the trials were like clinical grade PEMF products. They were not the products you're buying at like CVS.
Is that on the horizon for y'all as we kind of shift, I guess, into the New Horizons thing? Slightly the kind of skeptical consumer piece, but FDA, do you want to get FDA cleared eventually? Like, what's your thought on that kind of stuff?
I mean, whether we want to or not is not, I mean, it's hard to say. I think from our standpoint, like we do this to help people feel better and to give people access to technology that heals humanity. Right? Like that's our mission. Our mission is to create technology that heals humanity. And so if we're doing the FDA trials, they're being done right now in many different university systems. If the stars align and it turns out that the FDA is accepting of technology in a way that they're not today, because they're not really very accepting and helpful with getting technology over the line for patients today, if the stars align and all that works out, and it does actually prove, we do find that if we go down this FDA path and put all this investment in, that more people will get access to this healing technology, we will absolutely do it. There's no doubt that we will do it. I think the real question is what's going to happen with the FDA. We don't even know. And they just rejected MDMA therapy, which has overwhelming evidence to be the best treatment we have ever seen for any mental illness in the history of psychiatry. Like,
so disappointing.
And that is undeniable. Like if you look at the research in MDMA-assisted therapy, not to diverge too much, but that is people will criticize me for saying this, but being a physician who treats patients with infection, who's studied medical history in depth, I can tell you that the results from MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD are analogous to the results from the first antibiotics that were developed to treat infection. It is literally... It transforms mental illness like PTSD, which is currently considered to be a chronic, untreatable illness, into something that is acute and treatable. And we have never had that in mental health before. Like it's a potential cure for mental illness that we've never had before. And just like infections before antibiotics were around, syphilis was a terminal illness before penicillin. Wow. Right? Now syphilis is treated in 2 weeks with penicillin. Right? And you go on and you can go back to your regular life. And that is game-changing for humanity. And the fact that the FDA can't get their arms around that or their brains around that is really discouraging for all of us who are working on health technology and new therapies. So I'd say it's more in their court than anybody else to see, what's going to happen in the future. Yeah. But we're doing the trials, so we'll see what happens.
Love to hear that. We're a little bit over here. You got a second for the final two sections here?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. The last piece is really like what's on the horizon for Apollo. I mean, you talk about the sleep, which is game changing, and I use it. I love the SmartVibes. They're absolutely mind blowing. Something that I have to ask is, will there ever be an integration where my HRV drops and my Apollo starts to vibrate and starts to do its thing? Like, is that something that you guys are thinking about? Like, and that's just my limited brain. I would love to hear your other thoughts too.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we already do that with Oura Ring. But it's because Oura has an open data platform and we did this giant Oura study. So we know exactly which Apollo vibes boost HRV as measured by Oura and from that study. So we can literally watch your biometrics on Oura change and then turn Apollo on automatically. Here's the challenge. That's a SmartVibes feature, by the way, that you have access to. So if you don't have an Oura Ring, you should get one. Here's the challenge. The challenge is that there's a data syncing issue in terms of time window, right? So your data from your Ring or your Whoop or your Apple Watch only goes to your phone when you open the app. It's not real time.
I didn't think about that.
So technology, and the reason why it's not real time in large part is because of battery life issues of the wearable. If the wearable is pinging the phone all the time, battery just like drops like crazy. And that would really impair people's, likelihood of wearing it all the time. And so is it possible to do? Yes, it's possible. Is it possible to do right now? We're not quite there yet with other wearables, but that's what SmartVibes for Sleep does, is it detects sleep and then in real time prevents unwanted wake up. So we can do that with Apollo itself. With other wearable integrations, it's coming. I would say
it's coming.
Yeah, I would say like maybe 2026 is probably when we'll start to see the real-time wearable-to-wearable integration stuff coming out with Apollo. And that is definitely exciting to me because that means we can start to prevent stress episodes before they happen. And like, we've done it in the lab, like we've prevented violent autism episodes in the lab. But it's like taking that into the real world is very hard. But I think my best answer to your question is actually different, which is what's most exciting to me about what's coming is what's coming this year, which is called Apollo Sessions. And it is a mobile app version of Apollo that delivers Apollo vibes through your iPhone's haptic engine. And if you have an iPhone, we can't do this for Android yet because Android doesn't allow it. But if you have an iPhone, you can as of I think it's February 2025, so just about a month from now, you'll be able to take your phone, click a vibe, and change how you feel instantly by just holding your phone to your chest or putting it in your pocket or putting on your yoga mat or mattress next to you for free, right? So think about so to me, like it's the access that gets improved dramatically where now anyone with an iPhone gets a freemium version of the Apollo app, and now their iPhone's been upgraded to deliver scientifically backed Apollo vibes to your phone. And then if you want to subscribe and get more or get a wearable, you can do that. But the point is, it's there for you, and it's scientifically proven to calm you down. And we've never had a tool that can leverage the phone, like the smartphone technology. It's already in your purse or your back pocket to do something like that. Mm-hmm. Now we can, thanks to neuroscience. So you're welcome.
Yeah, it's game changing. My girlfriend is a sports psychologist for an NFL team, and she works in an extraordinarily stressful environment, just by the nature of like sports and things. And I got her an Apollo because I talked to her. I was hyping it up. I always do. I think I have over 100,000 minutes like logged since I've gotten it and stuff. And so, and she's like, this thing is insane. Like I feel so chill. And so it's really cool.
I'm so glad to hear that.
It's so cool to hear that it's going to be able to get to more people. And I'm almost positive I have tested out because I'm pretty sure I'm a beta tester. I get all of these emails and stuff.
Oh, then you have it then. You guys both have it
on the phone. Yeah, 100%.
On the phone. It's called because you're already a user. You have early access to it automatically. We gifted it to you. So if you
perfect.
Click on the Sessions tab in your app, and then you can use your phone when you forget your Apollo.
Yeah. So that's game changing. That's innovative thinking. I love that.
Oh, thank you.
Something else I like to think about in the next frontier section here is, so you're a founder of a health and wellness company and a neuroscientist. So what's your biggest concern about the health and wellness space that we should watch out for?
Oh, there's so many. I mean, I think my biggest concern is, and very frankly, like this was a big motivator for why Apollo Sessions, like why did we release Apollo for the iPhone, is because phones really stress people out. And it's not because there's anything wrong with the smartphone inherently that causes stress and mental illness, especially in kids, which we see a lot. It causes a lot of impulse control disorders in children. There are a lot of people who will deny that, but it's absolutely true that if you hand kids a screen at a very young age, they don't learn how to self-soothe, and they learn to distract themselves from stress and discomfort rather than self-soothing like we all had to learn when we were kids. And self-soothing is one of the single most important skills you can learn as a human being. It's like learning how to tolerate discomfort for a short amount of time and process discomfort is very, very, very important to being human.
And create safety for yourself, like you were talking about. Like
exactly, in any way that you can, that's healthy. And so I'd say like unintentional use of smartphone technology and screens in general is one of the single biggest threats that we are facing right now in our society, because it impacts children and it impacts adults, and it changes the way you think by captivating or capturing your attention. And our attention is the gateway to our consciousness. So what we pay attention to becomes us. It enters into us. So we allow it in. It's like a vampire, right? If it's not useful to us and we allow it in, it just steals our energy. If it's useful to us and we allow it in, then it becomes a tool and an asset and a growth opportunity. And much of the content that people are consuming from smartphones is to sell you shit you don't need, or to scare you into buying shit you don't need. And, or to divide, right? To create like division between humans. And nothing is more harmful as we are herd animals, nothing is more harmful than being divided, because then we're more likely to see each other for being different first rather than for our common ground first. We all, by nature of being human and by nature of being alive, have instantly more in common, and much, much more so than we do different. We have so much more in common. But if you use tech and that tech is saying, look how different you are from everybody else, right? And that's what you start to focus on because you're afraid, then you're going to make really bad decisions in your life that are going to alienate you from your community. They're going to alienate you from your relationships. They're going to cause divorce. They're going to cause stress, fights. They cause violence. It's a real thing. And that psychology can't be ignored. And so the nice part is the solution is simple. It's intentional use of technology. And it's called the do not disturb button. And you don't you don't let your phone command your attention. You choose to pick up your phone to engage with it for a purpose, right? And that's where it starts. And then there's a lot more stuff you can do there, but it's all about intention.
Yeah, no, I love that. And there's literal research that shows in why we're so divided. Like, why can I go to a coffee shop and I get along with like everybody, but then I open up my phone and it's like World War III is imminent, like it's crazy. And they've done research where they ask groups of people, Democrat, Republican, all the stuff, to rate different views of the opposite party. And so one of the wildest things is that the most extreme of either group, the most liberal people and the most conservative people, have the least accurate views of the other side. So I think conservatives would have guessed like over 80% of liberals are atheist, when in reality it's less than like 15%. And liberals would, there you go, you got it in. But and it's just wild. But they have the biggest microphones on social media. And so it's like the people who have the least accurate views of the other side's place or thoughts are the ones who have the biggest microphones. That's just freaking crazy. So yeah, that's interesting. I like that. All right, let's move into the last bit here and bring us in for a landing. This is our audiences. They live for this. This is one of their favorite things. It's called the Lightning Lab. The goal here is I'm going to throw you some quick questions. Try to respond to them in a word, one sentence, or a short story. Your choice, you pick. It's not like I'm going to cut you off here. One of the first question I love to ask is a myth that needs to die. So what's the number one health and wellness myth that you would like to bust?
That the mind and the body are separate. Because the mind and the body are connected, and it's undeniable based on modern neuroscience that the mind and the body are connected. So that needs to be squashed immediately.
There we go. I love it. I like to say they're separate but inseparable. Cool. Okay. I like that. Cool. Okay. Let's talk about one action that could change their life. So what's one thing our audience could do tomorrow to drastically improve their health and wellness?
Self-gratitude practice. Just wake up first thing in the morning and just thank yourself for being you.
Beautiful. Okay, last one here is, well, two more, but counterintuitive truth. So Peter Thiel likes to ask this to entrepreneurs a lot, but what is one important truth in the health and wellness space that very few people agree with you on?
Oh, that's a good one. I'd say that you can teach an old dog new tricks.
I agree with that one. Yeah, I'm with you on that. I know where you're going there. All right, last question is, what is one question that you wish more people asked you?
That's like the hardest one.
That's why it's last. Take your time.
I guess the question is, how are you? And have them actually care about the answer, hearing the answer.
I swear to God, the number of male founders that say this as the question they wish they were asked more is unreal. It truly is. It's kind of scary. Like between those guys, like it's kind of scary. All right, Dr. Dave, how are you? I really want to know. How are you doing?
I'm tired. I have a newborn. I run a startup. I run a nonprofit. I see patients. I do interviews. I'm tired, but I am very rewarded also at the same time. And so that's what keeps me going. But I need a good night's sleep.
I feel that. Good thing you've got that Apollo on your chest. I love that. Okay, last section here is, like I mentioned beforehand, every single guest gets to leave a question for the next guest. So for you, the person who left it was Stefan. He's from the founder of Sensate, which we talked about. And he asked, what is it to lead a good life?
Ooh, that's a good one.
And you can answer this in as long as responses you'd like.
Yeah, I really like that question. I would, kudos to you, Stefan. I would say that the answer to that question for me has a lot to do with, well, there's a couple different ways I would answer this question, but I think this has a lot to do with the meaning of life. Like, what is the meaning of life? Because I think a lot of the time, a lot of people spend so much time trying to figure out of their time alive, trying to figure out what is the meaning of life. And that is the wrong question to be asking. Because the meaning of life is very clearly, like from a science perspective, it's to discover yourself, right? It's like we're born, we don't know anything, and then we're brought into life, and the opportunity to non-judgmentally discover yourself. Like discovery itself, like anybody who's ever done a scientific experiment in truth is like discovery is one of the most single rewarding experiences that any human can have.
Wow.
And when you discover stuff about yourself and about the world and what you're capable of in terms of your human potential, I mean, it's next level. It's like, oh my God, I didn't know I could do that. Like, I didn't know I could anything, right? Like, it is not only reaffirming of your, but it's reaffirming of the ability to embrace the unknown without fear. Do you know what I mean? And like,
Wow.
I don't know what I'm capable of, but if I look at myself through the lens of a scientist and with discovery as the goal, not judgment, but discovery as the goal, not analysis, not criticism, not whatever anybody told me I'm supposed to think about myself as the first thing, but just non-judgmental, open-minded discovery. Like, I want to learn something new about myself today or what I'm capable of today. You will almost always be happy with what you find. And to me, like, that is the ultimate of like what it means to live a good life, is to live a life of self-discovery. And I think if we live a life of self-discovery, the other answer that I was going to give for this is if we live a life of self-discovery as the priority, we also live a life of no regrets. And regrets equals suffering. And so suffering is avoidable. Pain is not avoidable, but suffering is avoidable, as the Buddhists say. And so if we prioritize non-judgmental self-discovery, then we also prioritize living our life to its fullest, because we're not holding ourselves back. And based on what other people told us we were or were not capable of, or who we should or should not be. And then you live a life of no regrets and you feel joy always.
Damn, mic drop. Found the clip for the episode. No, that's great. I love that. That's awesome. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful way to wrap things up here. Last question is actually your question. You get to leave a question now. Like, what's the question you'd like to leave for the next guest? Don't know who they are, but they're
Right.
in the health and wellness space.
I think the question that I would probably ask, just maybe like less personal question, but more of like a societal question, is what, especially for health and wellness, is like, to me, it's like, what public health problem that we're facing right now do you think you could solve in your lifetime?
Wow. What public health problem that we're facing now do you think you could solve in your lifetime?
With or without a team of people behind you. But regardless, the point being, if there was one problem that you could tackle in your lifetime, one public health problem, what would that be?
So we always ask the guests their own question. What would that be for you? I've gotten a hypothesis based on our conversation, but what would that be for you?
It would be addiction, hands down. Addiction and substance use disorder.
Wow. The one public health issue you'd solve is addiction and substance use disorder. Why is that?
Yeah. I think the main reason is because I'm an addiction psychiatrist, which was influenced by the fact that I had a lot of people in my life growing up that were addicted to substances that were not necessarily, and most often not, recreational substances, but they were prescription substances that started it, because doctors did not understand the addictive potential of the medications that they were prescribing to somebody in a vulnerable state. And it ruined their lives. And it carried through to my life, to my family's life, to everyone who touched that person was impacted by that one drug that was misprescribed. Wow. Or that one experience that somebody had in a vulnerable state with a substance that they should not have taken in that state. Like in some other situation, it might have been fine. But in that situation, it was not good. And it was often delivered by somebody of authority. And so, and as an adult growing up, I have witnessed, as I start to ask people about their lives and get to know them, I don't know a single person, and maybe you're the exception, but I don't know a single person who does not know somebody who struggles with substance abuse. And that, especially with the opioid crisis now, and that is astounding to me, of how pervasive substance use is, and that it's insidious, because you can feel fine as somebody who has been taking opiates, for instance, for your entire life because the doctor prescribed them to you, and you can live what on the surface looks like a normal life. At the same time, you're taking something that impairs your judgment and your insight and results in very poor decision making that then has downstream long-term impact, negative impact on everyone around you in your relationships. And because of the nature of how the drug works, like opiates or benzos or alcohol, they impair insight. And so you don't even know that it's happening. Like you don't even know, you don't have the awareness to know, because your insight is that ability to look within yourself, introspect. If that's a core part of our brains, that's critically important for having a good human life. And if you don't have the ability to self-reflect because it's being impaired by a drug that a doctor told you to take, or that a drug dealer or a friend told you to take and you didn't know any better, and then you become hooked on it, like you're going to make bad decisions not once or twice or three times, but for your entire life. And
Holy shit.
that could be avoided. Like that could literally be avoided by having, I don't know, like a lot of my work is around like creating drug education for people, like how to use drugs safely and understand how they work, including psychedelics. But there's just, we have an abstinence only education around drugs in this country, just like in many states we do with sex. And you can't take the two major things that humans will do, which are take drugs and fuck, and tell them not to do it and expect them not to do it. They're going to fucking do it. Right? Like that's what people do. It's human nature. And so, I'm about like, let's teach people how to use these things safely, not tell them this is forbidden, because guess what? If you tell somebody something's forbidden, there's going to be even more mysticism about it. They're going to want to pursue it even more, and they're going to do it wrong more of the time. So if I could solve one public health problem in my lifetime, have that be my legacy, that would be the thing.
And what are you doing today to solve this drug and addiction, substance abuse issue that is putting you on that trajectory?
So, I mean, a lot of things. It's like my entire life in a lot of ways. I'm an addiction psychiatrist, so I train to be an addiction psychiatrist. I treat a lot of substance abuse on the individual patient level. I teach patients and doctors how to use drugs properly. I do a lot of general like education courses, lectures, things like that about how drugs work and how to understand how they worked and how to use them safely. I have like podcasts I run the Psychedelic Report, which is a leading psychedelic news show, which explains to the world about how psychedelics work and why, so that people don't get confused about that topic, because that's a really confusing topic. And they're very different from other substances. Apollo was actually a big motivation behind Apollo was when people feel like the biggest reason why people become addicted to a substance or anything, like a behavior like work or video games or gambling or whatever, is not because there's something wrong with them. It's because they're really uncomfortable and often in horrible pain, emotionally, mentally, or physically, and they don't know how else to deal with it. And one of the first addictions that we all have in our lives is actually sugar and money. It's not anything else. Sugar is one of the most addictive substances ever. And it activates earning money activates the same parts of our brains that snorting a line of cocaine activates. So guess what? Two most addictive substances are legal and they're available, and we are encouraged to interact with them all the time. And we are not taught this, right? And so addiction is a much bigger issue, because the brain learns through practice. So if you practice impulsive behavior, guess what? You get better at being impulsive, and then you're more likely to make impulsive decisions, and it's a slippery slope from there. And so Apollo is a way that helps people feel more safe and comfortable in their own bodies. And a big part of that work around developing this technology was, if we can help you feel safe and comfortable in your own body, guess what? You'll learn to self-soothe and tolerate discomfort better, and you'll reach for the bottle or that cigarette or whatever it is less. And it does help with that, which is so rewarding. But man, it's a lifelong process to solve a problem that big.
That's quite the purpose, man. I appreciate you sharing your purpose with us today on the pod. That's all we got for today. Is there any place, like in wrapping, that you would like to send people or make sure that they go check out as we wrap up, or anything you'd like to leave them?
I think we left them with a lot. We can let that soak in.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, 100%.
But I love to hear from people. So if you want to come find me, you can find me on socials, Twitter and Instagram at Dr. David Rabin. If you want to hear more and learn more about psychedelic science, check out my podcast radio show, The Psychedelic Report, on Spotify and Apple Music, Apple Podcast. And I also have another show on how the brain works. That's a quarterly show called Your Brain Explained, where we talk to experts about everything from AI to consciousness to psychedelic drugs to trauma, you name it, everything in between. And if you want to find Apollo, wearablehugs.com, apolloneuro.com. Wearablehugs.com is what the kids call it. And you can find me at my personal website, if you're interested in that, at drdave.io.
Boom. All right, great. We'll be sure to put all of that in the comments. Really excited for this conversation. It was awesome. That's it for our conversation. But as our viewers know, it's time for our lab results section. So be sure to stick around after we say goodbye to Dr. Dave to hear our unfiltered opinion and review of Apollo and the conversation and everything in between. It's that time. It's that time. Again, this is where we get to break down what we kind of really think. First and foremost is the lab test. This is the most important piece. Did they pass? Did they pass the lab test? Do I think they passed the lab test? Chloe wasn't here on this one, so it's really up to me on kind of my rating and stuff. Had a long conversation. It was a longer conversation than we sometimes get to have with these founders. Very transparent. Some of the research that I was doing beforehand, I was a little bit like, what's going on here? Some of this does not seem to pass the sniff test initially. That's kind of my thoughts. And you saw me ask the questions. There's not big sample sizes. Like, what's going on here? And how do you think about making claims? And after hearing a lot of the things that he said and being a user myself, I've used Apollo, like I mentioned in the episode, for hundreds of thousands of hours. I love it. I do believe that they passed the test here, not just because I'm a user, but because when you look at the data and you look at what they're doing and the future of what they're doing, it's very legitimate, and he had nothing to hide. Like, when I asked the tough questions, he answered directly. He's like, here's where we're at. Here's what's going on. So I really like that. I really appreciated that. So in my opinion, they passed the lab test for sure. And I absolutely would buy this. In fact, I have. And like I mentioned again on the episode, that bought one for my girlfriend even. So yes, I would buy this. The SmartVibes, it's crazy. Like, it just turns on and you're just like, yeah, I needed that. And it just reminds you, it calms you. It's nuts. The sleep stuff, it is wild. And just to hear some of the stuff that they've got coming in the future, get on board. Get on board for sure. I'm really, really excited. Apollo 2.0, the next version of this, is coming out. And maybe we'll link to the description if we can. Good Lord. They are a company to get on the bandwagon and be on the bandwagon. Definitely one that I'd actually buy. One of the things that caught me off guard, or something that was kind of new, was how thoroughly he explained the epigenetic shift for transgenerational trauma, and explained with really clear science how legacy burdens, legacy trauma, transgenerational trauma can get passed on from generation to generation to generation. That was a moment where I was like, whoa. That's nuts. And then same thing for the other surprising piece was the MDMA part, where he was talking about how it's just as important for healing trauma as antibiotics were. That's nuts, especially someone who's a neuroscientist and psychiatrist. Like, that was a big kind of like couple surprises and lessons learned. And yeah, that was nuts. I wasn't ready for that. So that's awesome. So that's it. That's the wrap for this episode of Decision Lab. I hope our lab results section gave you the clarity that you need to decide if today's brand is worth your money and time, or if it's total BS. And if you like this no BS approach to wellness, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'd love to have you here. Hit the bell notification. You'll get notifications. Drop in the comments other brands you want us to try to interview, and we'll try to get them on the pod. Or if you have questions about brands that are coming up, drop them in the comments, and we'd be happy to answer those. If we know the answer, we will. Otherwise, we will ask them directly to these founders, which you might not have access to, and we will ask directly hard-hitting questions to these founders, I promise. So please do drop stuff in the comments. We would really love to hear from you. But otherwise, see you next time on the Decision Lab. Peace.